Four eminent speakers are there who are well known their field and they are experts. The first presentation is on current global crop protection market and the key role that India will play in future development by Dr. Bob Fairclough. Dr. Bob Fairclough is a team leader and principal consultant of Cliffman Group's newly established Agriculture Input Market Trend Information and Consulting Unit Ag Market Insight Kinetic, Germany. Prior to joining the Cliffman Group, Dr. Bob spent over 20 years in the international business intelligence and market research support industry, most recently with the responsibility of developing AMIS Global. He holds a doctorate degree in plant pathology from the University of Glasgow and a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture Technology from Harper Adams University, England. So let us listen from Dr. Bob.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the offer and the opportunity to speak at PMFAI. I sincerely hope that you can see my screen. I maybe get some feedback from the organizers that you can see my screen. Can you actually see my screen, please?
No, sir. We cannot see your screen as of now.
Right, so let's just try once more.
Sure.
Please do tell me when you can see my screen and the presentation.
Yes, we can see the presentation, although it's not on the slideshow mode.
Okay, indeed. So now hopefully we have it on the slideshow.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So as I said, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to give this presentation. It's very much appreciated by us all. We only have 20 minutes, so it's an extremely short roll through the presentation. So you will have to accept my apologies for the quick movement through the slides. However, I'd like to go through two main parts. I'd like to look at the current global market size and trend, and I'd also like to look at then the factors affecting that market going forward, 22, 23, 24, 25, and so on. So if we look first of all at the current, excuse me, the current market size, and by current I mean 2019. That's the latest year that we have completely available. So the most important column is this column here, the crop protection column, and the sales over time, such that in 2019, the global market for crop protection, as measured at ex-manufacturer level, and using constant or using average year exchange rates throughout, reached $55.65 billion. Now that was an increase of just 0.072% over the previous year, and 2018 was 2.9, and so on. So we have had 3 years of very moderate, very small amount of growth following what is 2 years of a declining market. We're not seeing the strong growth rates that we saw back in 2009, 2010, but nevertheless, despite all of the challenges the market has, there is some small growth. If we compare that with India, because we want to try and put an Indian focus onto this, these figures, of course, are ex-manufacturer, so they're slightly different than the figures that Dr. Dave mentioned a few moments ago. But our estimates are around about a $2.5 billion market for the Indian domestic agricultural market in 2019. Key point, I think, rather than the absolute figure, because this excludes non-crop, for instance, is the growth rates. So India is a much stronger market than the global market. It also saw less of a decline in declining years. And to be honest, the decline is not so related to the global market. It's much more related to the monsoon. If you have a good or an average monsoon in India, you generally speaking have a good positive market going forward. So again, a little bit of contextual element to it. We talked about the $55.6 billion market. If we look at a regional basis, Asia remains the largest market globally. It's got around about the $16 billion market. Of course, Asia is predominantly by China, India, and Japan. Those are the three largest markets, and then a whole host of smaller markets. Clearly, the growth rate over a 10-year period has been quite quite good. It's been over the global average at 3.5%. And even in this last year in 2019, it posted a 2.6% growth rate. I think India, India is an important pillar of this growth going forward. We have some slides of looking out, and certainly the growth of the Indian market, both domestically and in terms of the export material, is an important pillar to this growth going forward. Drilling down a little bit into the regions, again, a bit perspective. And for generic companies, and I appreciate I'm speaking to a number of off-patent chemical companies, it's often easier to put the new products into markets which are growing the fastest. And this is just simply a list of the fastest growing markets over the last 10 years. Romania mainly because of maize, Indonesia because of palm oil, Russia has been policy as much as anything, Costa Rica is bananas. We can go down the list. The important thing is, I think, that India is ninth in this list, and simply because of the sheer size of India as the fourth or fifth largest market globally, then clearly this has a huge influence on the overall market. Again, you've got to compare this growth of 7% or thereabouts, 8%, with the global CAGR of 2.98% over that time period. So India, as all these markets, growing significantly faster than the rest of the globe, essentially. If we then conversely look at the worst performing markets, the ones that we need India as much as anything, and we need Indian generic companies, off-patent companies, in the investment to actually boost these countries going forward. Again, numerous reasons why these markets should be in decline. I don't intend to go through them. I think more important for me is the appearance of France, and just below it, the appearance of Germany. Large European markets now becoming in the top 10 worst performing countries in the world. I mean, it's an indication of the way the market, particularly in Europe, is going, and we'll touch on that in a few moments. I think the last slide, more or less, on this sort of element is really, again, it's just perspective. It's just, where is India relative to the other large markets? I mean, we have a marked and stepped degradation or change, if you like, from the big two of Brazil and US. I always think round figures, $9 billion for these two markets. China around about $6 billion. India, ever increasing. Japan, always under pressure. Flat market at best, dominated by rice subsidies and so on. For sure, when I come back, if I'm invited this time next year, I would not be surprised to see India, superseding Japan in terms of its position on the global market. And likewise, Russia probably superseding Argentina, France moving down a couple of steps. So, it's a dynamic market essentially. And India, as I've said before, in 2019, as in 20, I would suggest benefited from what was a reasonable or good or an average monsoon. Helping the growth of the market domestically. A couple of slides really just on India perspective to the rest of the world. If you look at the global market, we've talked about our $55.6 billion market for 2019. Globally, herbicides dominate. We have 50% roughly, which is a herbicide, and the fungicide insecticide market, very similar. Completely different picture, of course, when we look at India, in that the insecticide market is the herbicides, it's 50% of the market. Then you have insecticides and fungicides at a much, much smaller percentage. And I think maybe, as we see the Indian market develop over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more growth in the fungicide market, and corresponding growth in the herbicide market, and possibly and probably a reduction in the percentage, at least, of the insecticide market. Really, as the market develops and moves more in line with the global picture. 2019 in summary, very, very quickly, growth 0.7%, as I said. When we started looking at the market in January 2019, we were very optimistic. It didn't perform, mainly because of the US, which is what we're seeing here, this decline in 3%. So it was a good start to the year, but disappointing essentially at the end of the year. If we look at Asia, 2%, so not the largest growth in 19, but most important, I think, for this presentation is that India outstripped that growth at something like 4.4%. All that data, of course, is our data from our research, we have to compare it with what the companies are saying. And if we look at the leading companies in that year, so 19 over 18, we saw actually their weighted growth, so the overall growth of those companies was less than 0.72. But if we counteract that, and here I use China as an example, but also we could use India, you know, the exports of the Indian and the Chinese were markedly increased. So there was a close correlation, as we would expect, between the sales of the multinationals plus the off-patent sector and the growth of the industry as well. Very quickly, I'd like to look at 2020. So this is the year just gone. We haven't got the full figures in. We don't have the Q4s, of course, of companies. But at this point in time, we're looking at a 1.5% growth of the market overall over 19. I'm going to drill straight down to the Asian region. You know, Asian region actually performing the best, essentially. You know, I see a 3% here, but that's essentially a rebound. That's a repositioning of North America to where it should be. But we're getting good growth in Asia, you know, good monsoon in India, as I mentioned, pest pressure, drought in Australia is breaking. There's numerous reasons for this growth. And once again, you know, India is outperforming the global market and indeed the Asian market as well. As a comparison, we do have Q3s for the leading companies, and if we look at the Q3, you know, first 9 months rather, of the leading companies, and you know, basically lots of green numbers and not so many red, not many below the line. So the multinationals are performing better by an average or a weighted average of around about 1% than they did in 2019 so far for the 2020 period. So again, indicative that we will be looking at around about a 1 to 1.5% growth in 2020. Looking further forward, 2021, I really believe that there's more, and we see a bright light at the end of the tunnel. Very strong, strongly driven by the improvement in commodity prices that we're seeing across the board. Of course, we have to take into account COVID-19, and there's assumptions made there as well. But you know, suffice to say, Asia growing the biggest, 6% in 2021. So we you know, we're just starting this period now, very positive. And you know, likewise within that, India most likely to perform better than that 5.6% we're seeing for the average of the region. So I believe I have a few minutes left. I don't have my time here, but somebody will tell me if I'm running out of time. So we have a few moments just to really look at the long-term factors. So it will be very quick. COVID-19, you cannot talk about any industry at the moment without talking about COVID-19. I just want to illustrate that we should be glad that we're not in the tourist trade or in domestic services. This was a study by the World Bank. They were saying, you know, 10% back in March, decline in turnover, essentially. These figures have probably gone worse. They said, the World Bank said that they felt agriculture would be 3% decline. Our belief is actually it's less. As far as the crop protection market is concerned, obviously the World Bank doesn't talk about that, but our view is that the market would have grown around about 1.5% more than it did had COVID-19 not appeared on the scene. India, we believe, is least impacted relative to, say, the markets such as US, Argentina, or Brazil. And the European Union, we believe, is least impacted of all. Part of it's down to timing. So when did the pandemic hit? Part of it's down to fiscal response, and both the European Union and the Indian government have been extremely proactive on this. You know, and part of it is down to agriculture and the importance that agriculture plays within the whole economy. So we could talk for 20 minutes about this alone, clearly, but you know, COVID-19, yes, it had a big impact. We're not in the tourist industry, and as far as India or indeed the European Union is concerned, we came off better, at least to date, than maybe Brazil and Argentina. The other key market-related factor for 2020 was exchange rates, and you know, again, no real time, but you know what this slide is showing that is if you were an American company selling into Brazil, for instance, and everything stays the same, then the amount of dollars that you get back simply because of devaluation of that currency at that point in time would have been down 27%, simply because of exchange rate. And that is the same whichever currency you look at across both the euro and indeed the US dollar. Huge changes in 2019 and 2020, big to the year before as well in exchange rates, down to numerous reasons, but fundamentally strengthening of the US dollar. We've had a new administration in Washington, D.C. In all probability, we are going to start to see the US dollar weakening. So again, something to be more optimistic for 21 as compared to, say, 2020. Commodity prices I did touch upon, but this is the key, the main driver why we're so optimistic about 2021. Wherever you look, be it rice out of India, be it corn out of US or out of Europe, soy out of Europe, commodity prices have really been ramping up from about April time. And these are just 3 examples. And that, again, is for numerous reasons as to why that's actually happening, but there's no sign of an end to this commodity bubble bursting at the moment anyway. Industry related changes, of course, we saw all these large multinationals joining. We're not going to see that continue anymore, but we are seeing consolidation within the smaller off-patent companies and also the Japanese companies. And I just want to touch on this one. We're also seeing inward investment into China, but into India from outside the world. Looking, I heard Dr. Dave say earlier, about India's ability to manufacture chemicals, full stop, essentially pesticides as well. And this is one example of Mitsui and Nippon Soda. Market-related factors, I know it's a long way. Some of it's a long way forward, but most of these active ingredients in this list are coming off patent, have been either off patent or coming off patent very soon. I will ask companies not to always look at the sales. There's more to jumping into a chemical, an off patent chemical, than just the biggest sales. Lots of reasons to believe that maybe, for instance, a given fungicide is better than the leading fungicide simply because of numerous reasons and how it fits in with a off-patent chemical company's portfolio. Looking forward, so now looking 17 years ahead, if you like, these are the molecules which are coming into the market now from the multinationals, from the R&D companies. These are the ones which are going to be, if you like, the new generics down the road in 10 to 15 years time. And there's nothing like forward planning in terms of saying, hey, this is an interesting molecule, we need to start looking at this now, even though we know we can't get into the market for another 10 years. Final 2 slides for the organizers. Regulatory related, again, 20 minutes on this would not be enough. My feeling on this one is the main point really essentially is, if I'd been talking 3-4 years ago, I would only have been talking about the European Union. That's where regulatory issues was happening. Now it's global, and we know very well about the draft gazette, which came out in mid of 2020 for India. We know about the situation in Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia, the US. Wherever you look at it, everyone is putting extra regulatory pressure on pesticides. And I will digress slightly. I had sincerely hoped that the COVID-19 and the response of the companies to find a solution would have actually improved the public perception, if you like, of chemicals and pesticides and crop protection and so on. But unfortunately, it has not been the same, being the case. So technology related, very last slide. And again, thank you for the opportunity. We can only touch on this, but there are a lot of technological related factors impacting the market going forward. What I want to say is I think India is right at the forefront of many of these. It's right at the forefront of biologicals. It's at the forefront of commercial drones, as is most of Asia. And I believe it would be a very good test market for being involved in evolving distribution, so having bigger farm shops, a different face of retail, much more. It's going to have a bigger impact within the Indian market than, say, for the US market, which is already quite a shrunken distribution chain. Thank you. And again, I really thank you for the opportunity. I hope I haven't run over time, and I will hand back to the organizers. And I wish everybody an extremely good meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. for the detail on global crop protection market and also highlighting India's role and contribution to global food security by the enormous growth in crop protection, as India is the fastest growing market. Rightly said, India is much stronger market and is also important pillar for the global market. I hope this talk is very helpful for Indian industry to get updated with the global crop protection market and to find out new avenues for them. It is likely to provide opportunity to enter into it untapped market. Now, I can ask if there is any question. There is time for only 2 questions, if any. The delegates, please share your name and company details before asking the questions. Delegates, please. If there is any question,
Yeah.
just waiting for the questions. Yeah, we have 2 questions.
Indeed. I will unmute. I believe I can see the questions. So biopesticide market is one question I see. So, I mean, there's numerous figures for the biopesticide market in terms of what the total size is. And it's an incredibly difficult figure to pin down whether or not it's a billion or 1.5 billion. There's also an extremely difficult question as to what is a biopesticide, because there's no universal acceptance of biopesticide or not. So, you know, those absolute figures are really difficult to tie down. The one thing that's absolutely clear is that biologicals, biopesticides, biostimulants, there's numerous terms for them, growth far exceeds that of conventional pesticides. I mean, so double-digit growth is definitely the case for biologicals. But what we need to see is some drivers for that. At the moment, the drivers are political, social. They're not economical. It's not really in the economic interest of a grower, I'm afraid, to use a biological over and above a conventional pesticide. So I think we need to see some more economic drivers in order to encourage growers more and more. Having said that, you know, the Eco-Phyto Plan in France, and then now more latterly the Green Deal in Europe, essentially is just one very small step from essentially banning all synthetic chemicals within certain nations of the European Union. So there could be, what we could see is, you know, gradual, 10%, 12% increase per annum through natural growth rate of the biologicals, and then a stepped increase as countries decide to say, okay, we're going to test this out. We're going to test the theory that we can live without conventional synthetic pesticides, and then you're going to start to see 30, 40, 50 doubling of the biological market in a single year. So very interesting space, one to keep a very close eye on, and certainly one that should give good returns going forward. I don't know if there's a time for this. Somebody needs to tell me. Would it be a future scope for particularly CS's capture suspension? There's very few commercial products available as of now. Yes, Dr. Ralph, extremely correct. I mean, I saw the CS's come through. Lambda cyhalothrin, I think, and deltamethrin were two from memory. It doesn't seem to be a formulation type or delivery method that's taking off as we had expected it to. The market shifted very much to sort of the ODs, oil dispersibles, if I'm correct. So there's going to be continued growth. There always is development in delivery methods. I think what's key here is, will that type of formulation be suitable for use for low volume applications, and will it be suitable for the active ingredients which are going to be developing in the future? And Lambda is one I mentioned, and Lambda most certainly is. Delta is another one I mentioned, which I don't think is. So it's a difficult question, very specific. I hope I've given some view to that one, but thank you for the question. I see one. I see now all the questions are coming through. So somebody needs to tell me when to stop. But biologicals we've covered. Significant changes happen in regulatory compliance. Yeah, after Brexit. Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Yes, what's going to happen, of course, is that we have now a divergence between the European regulatory system and the European Union. So, for instance, glyphosate will have different regulations, and we'll certainly have a longer extension period in the UK compared to the European Union. And that could be a very good opportunity for generic and off-patent companies, putting a molecule in an easier market for regulatory, a more friendly market for regulatory, following more along the lines of the US regulatory system. But the European Union still will insist that we follow certain guidelines, and that any exported food can only have sort of MRLs and all these types of things. I think for me, what will be most interesting is, will the European Union be able to continue its regulatory program, simply because the UK used to actually do so much work for it. So I think we're going to see a slowdown, a challenging European regulatory system going forward, simply because of manpower. We're going to see a divergence within the UK, particularly, and a relaxing. So we may see GMOs, for instance, and we're certainly going to see a less stringent regulatory system. So that's significant changes in Brexit. Biopesticides, I believe we touched on, and then the what, according to you, a biggest growth driver? Of course. I just saw a question, but I can't say to anybody what's the biggest growth driver for crop protection market. I believe that was a question. Without doubt, commodity prices. If commodity prices continue to increase, then without question, there is going to be a continuation of that. Farmers, if they perceive they're going to get, and key word is perceive, if they perceive they're going to get a good price for their grain, they will invest in higher quality, higher priced active ingredients. So thank you for the questions, I believe.
Okay, thank you, sir, very much. It's a time restriction. So thank you, Bob. So
Indeed.
moving to the next presentation by Ms.